Welcome, everyone, to the Channel Islands Restoration Environmental Experts webinar series. First, I'll mention what Channel Islands Restoration is. For those who don't know, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We're a habitat restoration contractor. We do environmental consulting, and we do environmental education. And we do it in 3 counties and have done it on all 8 of the Channel Islands at one time or another. Tonight's webinar is entitled Working Across Borders to Conserve Birds and Habitats in the Southwestern U.S. and Northwestern Mexico. And our presenter today is Jennie Duberstein. And I'm going to read from my phone because I can see a little bit easier than I can on the screen. She is the director of the Sonoran Joint Venture. She is a wildlife biologist and conservation social scientist who has spent her professional career working to build partnerships for birds and habitat conservation across the United States and Northwest Mexico. Jennie has directed environmental education programs, developed community-based conservation projects in region, developed and taught courses and workshops on bird identification, ecotourism, and bird monitoring, and has studied species including double-crested cormorants and wading birds in Sonora and yellow-billed cuckoos in Arizona. She has also worked with young birders for the past 30 years, directing field courses, summer camps, and conferences, and generally helping connect young people with opportunities and each other. Jennie received her BS in wildlife biology from Virginia Tech and her MS and Ph.D. from the School of Natural Resources and the Environment at the University of Arizona. If you have any questions for Jennie tonight as we finish the webinar, or actually during or at the end, please put them in the Q&A section of the Zoom window. We will read them for you. So just type in your questions. We welcome them and enjoy reading them to the group and to the presenter. Visit cirweb.org/webinars to see a recording of this webinar and many, many others. We've done all kinds of great webinars that cover all kinds of different natural history topics over the last several years. And it's really a great opportunity to learn about all kinds of really neat things. CIR also wishes to acknowledge that the land upon which we do our restoration work is the unceded territory of the Chumash people. We pay our respects to the Chumash elders, past, present, and future, for they hold the memories, traditions, and culture of this land we work to protect. And with that, we'll turn it over to Jennie, and she can share her screen.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation to be here with y'all. Give me a half a second to get things organized on my side. That out of the way, hide the fluting meeting controls. All right. Good evening. My name is Jennie Duberstein. I direct the Sonoran Joint Venture, which I'm going to spend the next 35 to 40 minutes talking to you about and telling you about the work that we do, who we work with, and where we do it. And I've given some flavor of this talk a bunch of times, and I decided to start off and do something new. So this is the first time I've ever done this. You don't know me at all, and I thought it might be interesting before I just jump in and talk to you about declining bird populations and efforts to bring people together to work on them, for you to get to know a little bit about me, about who's going to be talking at you through your screen for the next little bit. So, who am I? You know my name. You heard a little bit about my professional work through my bio, but I am the daughter of Lorraine Vinograd on the left, who was born in Northern Virginia, grew up in Northern Virginia. My father, Alan Duberstein from New York City, grew up in Brooklyn. This is my maternal grandmother, who I'm actually named after. This is Nellie, and I'm Jennifer Nell. This is her and her three brothers, my great uncles. On my father's side, I'm the granddaughter of Benjamin Duberstein and Beatrice Junkovitz. This is them standing in front of my childhood home. I was born a chubby-cheeked, dimple-cheeked baby. I still have those dimples in Washington, D.C. And on my first birthday, we moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I grew up about 10 miles south of the city in the South Hills. For the first 10 years of my life, I was the second of three children. That's me on the left, my sister Susan, and my brother John. And then when I was not quite 10 years old, my youngest brother Matt was born. And I spent most of my life, I had brown hair, brown eyes. My siblings both had these bright blue eyes. My dad had blue eyes. My mom had green eyes. And I thought, where did I come from? And then my younger brother Matt was born. And this is me. And this is Matt. And you can see we're sort of like the male and female version of the Duberstein child. So these are my brother John, my sister Susan. Sorry, Susan, we cut off half of your face. There's my mother, Lorraine. I'm also an aunt to two nephews. This is Benny in the middle and Freddie on the right. I'm a trail runner. I love running ridiculously long miles on trails. The farthest I've run is 100 kilometers, a 62-mile trail race. I love birds. Here's a picture of me doing some red-billed tropic bird monitoring on San Pedro Martir Island in the Gulf of California. And as Ken mentioned in my bio, I've also, for the last 30 years, been working with young birders, so teenagers who are interested in birds. And I direct a summer camp currently for the American Birding Association in Colorado, and I lead another summer program for young birders here in Arizona called Camp Chiricahua. And we spend a lot of time hiking around. This is me in the front here, looking at birds, learning about conservation, and just enjoying nature. So that's me. Now I'm going to jump into the bird stuff. You may have read this paper. Back in 2019, Ken Rosenberg, who was a senior research scientist at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, he and his colleagues published a paper in Science that we in the field call it the 3 billion birds paper. And basically, they looked at data and they found that since 1970, bird populations in the United States and Canada had declined by almost 2.9 billion birds, almost 3 billion birds. 1 in every 4 birds that was in the United States and Canada has disappeared since 1970. And they found that this is true across groups of birds, for eastern forest birds, for boreal forest birds, for aerial insectivores, for grassland birds, which have declined more than 50% since 1970. Their study did not look at seabirds, but I'm going to bring in another study that Ken Rosenberg, actually the author of this paper, is part of. Based on this, they're trying to figure out where do we invest time and money in conservation. And there's an effort called the Road to Recovery, which is an effort to look at the birds that are declining the most steeply and bring people together to do something about it. And they have a list of what they call tipping point species. And these are, birds that are sort of at that tipping point. We have to do something before they go over the edge. They've identified 112 tipping point species. 27 of them, 24%, are seabirds. And of those 27 seabirds, I did some quick field guide Googling. About 52% of those are birds that occur within the Sonoran Joint Venture, specifically, birds that at some point in their annual cycle could be found in the Channel Islands region. So this sort of speaks to the importance of the area for birds and also the dire need for investment in conservation. The 3 Billion Birds paper, it talked a lot about things are kind of going down the toilet for a lot of birds, but it wasn't all bad news because there are 15 million more raptors in North America and north of Mexico today than there were in 1970. There are 35 million more waterfowl, woodpeckers. There are 14 million more woodpeckers than there were in 1970. And if we think about like what has happened since 1970 and now, well, we stopped spraying DDT all over the place. And it turns out when you take DDT out of the system, raptors can recover. We, in the 1980s, created the North American Waterfowl Management Plan, and we created the North American Wetlands Conservation Act, and we invested a ton of effort and money in waterfowl and wetland conservation, and waterfowl populations have responded. So the take-home message from all of this, for me, is that where we invest in conservation, go figure, it can work. So with enough money and effort, we can have a positive impact on the things that we're trying to affect. What if we could all just sit around a table and have a conversation? It would be interesting to talk about the things that are putting pressure on birds, the threats that are facing them, the dangers that they encounter as they go through their lives. And I put this list together very quickly. Everything from urban and suburban development to water allocation, alternative energy development, mining. Absent from this list are things like collisions with buildings, feral and free roaming cats, any number of other items that could be on this list. But one thing that they all have in common, if you take a look at them, at some level, every single thing on this list is the result of human activity. So people and the things that we do as we move through the world, we are having an impact on birds, on wildlife, on ourselves, if we really think about it. And I like to say that conservation is about behavior. As you heard in the introduction, I'm an ornithologist and a wildlife biologist, but I'm also a social scientist. And I work at that intersection of people and the natural world. And so when we talk about behavior in bird conservation, usually, not always, but most of the time, we are not trying to change bird behavior. We're trying to change human behavior, right? We want people to start doing something. Maybe we want them to keep on doing something that they're already doing. Often we want them to stop doing something. And so in order to work in this field of conservation, it's important to study the birds, but it's just as important to study the people and know the people and understand what drives their behavior, what their values are, what the incentives are that would get them to change their behavior, and to work with people to achieve the conservation outcomes that we want to see. So you may or may not have heard of the Migratory Bird Joint Ventures, and I'm just going to very briefly tell you about the program. You can go to mbjv.org and see this map and find out more about the joint ventures where you live. You may all live within the geography of the Sonoran Joint Venture. You may overlap with other joint ventures. But essentially what joint ventures are cooperative regional partnerships that bring together federal and state agencies, nonprofit organizations, academia, private industry, tribal nations, private landowners, all these people that have common interests to say, what are the things that we're all concerned about, but that are too big for one organization, one state, in the case of the Sonoran Joint Venture, one country to tackle by themselves? How can we add value to the work of each other by collaborating and working together? So we bring together all these partners. There's 23 joint ventures all across the United States, Canada, and most of Mexico. I don't know if you can, let's see, pointer options. Give me a laser pen. There we are. This is the Sonoran Joint Venture right here. Some of you, if you live a little bit farther up the coast, our boundary sort of ends right around Santa Barbara, and just north of us is the California Central Coast Joint Venture, which is this white patch right here. You get a little bit farther inland, and you get to the southern boundary of the Central Valley Joint Venture. You can go to nbjv.org and learn more about all of that. This is a zoomed in look at the Sonoran Joint Venture. You can read our mission here. We're a pretty big geography. So we include all or part of 9 states in 2 different countries, many, many indigenous nations. There are 57 federally recognized tribes in the United States and Canada. And, that map in your land acknowledgement, there were more than 57 bands listed, points on that map just in that one little piece. So many, many, many indigenous nations. We have documented more than 745 species of birds, either breeding in, migrating through, or wintering in this geography. And it's an incredibly biodiverse, bioculturally diverse, culturally diverse also geography. And it's a spot where there's influence from the Sierra Madre from the south. There's influence from the Rocky Mountains from the north, the Sonoran Desert from the west, the Chihuahuan Desert from the east. There's some influences from the Great Plains, from the Great Basin, and all of these ecosystems sort of come together in the Sonoran Joint Venture geography. And so we have lots of species, birds, but other things also that are just at the northern limit of their range, or the eastern limit, or the southern limit, or the western limit. And it's why we have more than 700 almost 750 species of birds there. It's a spot that people come to from all over the world to look at birds and other things, and that's the reason why. So what do we do? When I try to describe my job as the director of the Sonoran Joint Venture, let me get the red dot off my chin. I sometimes describe myself as a conservation matchmaker. And my job is to know a lot of people and know who they are and what their needs are and what they're looking for, and then try to connect them with other people or with resources or with training or with funding, to provide facilitation, to support collaboration, to help coordinate efforts across borders, whether they're organizational borders, whether they're county borders, state borders, country borders, and to provide support to our partners, so that they can do the great work that they do on the ground. I came into this, I've been with the Sonoran Joint Venture for, I can't do the math in my head, almost 23 years. And I came here from the NGO world, and it's great. I have, I think, the best job, that people come to you and say, I need help with XYZ thing. And my job is to try and find them help so that they can do XYZ thing. You feel a little bit like Santa Claus or something. The types of work that we support are really diverse. This slide, kind of is an effort to put a little bit of a summary on that. Everything from habitat restoration and protection, supporting coordinated bird monitoring efforts where people are sharing data and using the same protocols across geographies so we have a better idea of how a species is doing across its range. We're working real hard to bring social science and the human dimensions into the work of our partners, using ecotourism as a conservation tool, and sometimes funding research where we have critical gaps in our knowledge and need to understand what's going on. There are 3 of us on staff, and we all do a little bit of everything. I'm an employee of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but we have a management board. So I have sort of a board of directors, and the Fish and Wildlife Service is one of the partners of the Sonoran Joint Venture, but there are 21 other agencies on my board. In addition to me as the director, the coordinator of the joint venture, I have a staff member in Mexico, Selene Moncayo, who coordinates our partnership south of the border, and then a science coordinator, Adam Hanuxella, who is based here. I think I forgot to say, I'm based in Tucson, Arizona, homelands of the Tohono O'odham and Pascuayaqui. But the real power of the Sonoran Joint Venture doesn't come from those 3 full-time staff. We're like I said, the matchmakers. It comes from our many, many partner organizations. And to give you just a taste of, these are the organizations that are represented on our management board currently. And you'll see it's a mixture. We really strive to maintain 50% participation, 50% membership from the United States, 50% membership from Mexico. My current board chair is Federico Mendez Sanchez, who's the executive director of Grupo de Ecología y Conservación de Islas, which is an Ensenada-based NGO that does island conservation work throughout Mexico and actually has collaborated quite a lot with Channel Islands National Park and CIES and other folks working in the Channel Islands. So this group, I'm actually preparing for my board meeting. We're going to meet in San Diego next week. Comes together 3 times a year and really helps provide the strategic direction of the Sonoran Joint Venture. We also have a science working group that is open to anybody that has an interest in birds and conservation in the region. Our next meeting is in late April here in Arizona, out near Elgin, if you're familiar with the region, at the Audubon's Appleton Woodtail Research Ranch, focusing on grassland conservation. And I'll have a slide at the end that has my contact information if you'd like to hear more about that. We work across lots of different borders, but the international border is often the most challenging border. We're in interesting times. And so a lot of what we do is try to come up with creative ways to help people collaborate across those borders. Even in the best of times, these are some of the things that make working with somebody in the United States or somebody in Mexico a challenge. Communication, maybe you don't speak the same language, different access to technology, different access to funding, money that can only be spent in one country or another, or challenges getting money from the United States to Mexico or vice versa. When I started working in this region 25 years ago, the capacity for doing the work in Mexico was a lot lower. Where today there's kind of an incredible generation of birders and people working in bird conservation. As an employee of the U.S. federal government, I can tell you that bureaucracy often gets in the way. Last fall, on September 30th, I was at a meeting in Ensenada. I was the keynote speaker at the big Mexican Ornithological Congress that was happening. And if you think back in time to what happened at midnight on September 30th, it was that Congress failed to pass a budget and the government shut down. So I had to get in my car and drive home the next day. Fortunately, the day after I had already given my talk, but bureaucracy gets in the way. And then just understanding differences in culture. These things can make working across the international border a challenge. And the role of the Sonoran Joint Venture is to help bridge these gaps. So the birds don't really care that there's a geopolitical border. The habitat on one side is the same Sonoran Desert or the same whatever the habitat is as it is on the other side. And the Sonoran Joint Venture really tries to bring people together to think about conservation in spite of those borders. How can we work together? Sort of pretending as much as we can that border doesn't exist. And one of the ways that we're the most successful is that is literally by bringing people together, spending time with each other in the field. You might recognize yourself or some of these colleagues, some of your colleagues in these pictures. The upper left-hand corner was a recent science working group meeting at San Diego National Wildlife Refuge, and the other 3 were from another, I don't remember if it was a board meeting or a science working group meeting that we had in Ensenada, and we got to take a field trip out to one of the islands, which was really, really fun. But those are the ways, like focusing on relationships, helping build, helping support trust and confidence in each other, so that we feel comfortable working together. One of the big things that the Sonoran Joint Venture does is help develop um, sort of regional plans to guide bird and habitat conservation. And so we have a strategic plan that is just sort of, guides the way that the joint venture functions as an entity. We have just finished, it is being designed as I speak to you tonight, our conservation implementation plan, which is a 25-ish page document that kind of is a high level 10-year plan for the things that we want to do. And I'm excited about that one. So I'm going to spend a couple of slides giving you a teaser about what's in it. And then we have a bird conservation plan. And this is sort of like the big, thick, lots of tables, lots of numbers, that looks at all of those 745 plus species of birds and helps us decide which are the ones that are most in need of our care, our stewardship. We have some species that are in need of care because they're really, really threatened, or endangered. We have some species that are in need of care. We call them our stewardship species. We have stewardship responsibility for them because 90% of the global population of that species occurs within our geography. So even though their population might be doing just fine, we need to keep an eye on it, because if we don't, nobody else will, because they just don't occur anywhere else. Our conservation implementation plan it's different than most other joint venture implementation plans. And this is a snapshot of the table of contents. It starts with, these are what our values are. This is our vision. This is our mission. This is what the landscape of conservation work looks like. These are the major working groups that are out there that we're involved with. This is the role that the Sonoran Joint Venture is playing. One of the challenges that we have is that we have a pretty big geography. I talked about how bioculturally diverse the region is. We have a pretty small budget, we have a pretty small staff, and it's really easy. I think this is true even if you work in a smaller, less biodiverse area. It's easy to feel like you're running around putting out little fires or doing little bits of good things here and there, but it's hard to see how that's all connecting and adding up to a bigger vision. And so one of the things that we're trying to do with our conservation implementation plan is focus in a little bit. So we have 6 major ecosystems, plus a section on looking at those ecosystems through a biocultural landscape, recognizing that people are inextricably connected to the land. And you can't pull people out of the system. They're part of it. And we need to recognize that. We have a summary of what we call the major pressures. So these are the things that are putting pressure on birds and habitats. We have 4 main goals, 4 straightforward goals that I'm actually going to share on the next slide. Each goal has 5 objectives. We have lists of recommended stewardship actions. These are the things that we think you should do in grasslands. These are the things that the joint venture recommends on islands, etc. Islands are one of our 6 major ecosystems. There's a section about how we're going to monitor, evaluate, and adapt based on what we learn from our monitoring and evaluation. There's a table that outlines funding needs, and then we talk about the next steps. So what are our goals? So there's 4. Like I said, the first one is to build, well, let me take a step back. We wrote this plan, then last January happened. And so we had to go back to the plan and do some rewriting of our plan. And this is where we landed. So the first goal is to build a strong organizational and operational foundation for our work to support efforts that ensure thriving human communities along with birds and other wildlife. And so this is kind of that idea of a biocultural landscape. We're doing things that are good for human communities, also good for avian communities and other wildlife communities. Our second goal focuses on supporting Indigenous sovereignty and the ways in which we can work with Indigenous nations and Indigenous peoples to support their engagement and leadership in stewardship actions, not just on Indigenous lands, but also on public and private lands. Our third goal is about capacity building. And so we want to share and build capacity and support for habitat stewardship and restoration. So things like training. And then our fourth goal is go out and do things for birds and habitat. We want to support the implementation of stewardship actions to address habitat loss and degradation and promote healthy and thriving communities of birds, other wildlife, and people. So we tried to keep it simple. Like we want the joint venture partnership to be strong and operate from a solid place. We want to support Indigenous sovereignty in doing this work. We want to provide people with the tools and training they need to do this work. And we want to support them in doing good things for birds and bird habitat. For the rest of my presentation, I'm going to just give you a smattering of different projects and different programs that the Sonoran Joint Venture has and supports. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for questions at the end. One of the main ways that we've been able to help our partners over the Sonoran Joint Venture was created in 1999. So however long ago that was, 30-ish years, is by providing funding through small grants. And we had, up until 2 years ago, a competitive small grants program. We're in a process of re-envisioning that, but we will still be providing funding to our partners to do priority work. But since 1999, we have given out about $1 million to our partners to support projects that address our highest priorities. And these are truly small grants. They might be $5,000, $10,000, 15, maybe 20 at the most, but usually in the $10,000 to $15,000 range. And most partners it's not required, but a lot of them leverage that money with match so that our impact goes even further. If you go to our website, you can read all about all the projects that we've supported over the years. Another thing that we try to do is develop conservation tools that our partners can use. So things we can invest in something to develop it that will then have a broad impact and a broad reach on lots of people. One example of this is the Borderlands Avian Data Center. I think there's one more animation. There we go. You can go to borderlandsbirds.org. I've already talked about birds and habitats not really caring about geopolitical boundaries. And one of the things that is a barrier to bird conservation is lack of communication, lack of collaboration, lack of coordination for bird monitoring protocols, for data management, and really just the inability to easily collaborate across projects. And so we created BADSI, which is a portal of the Avian Knowledge Network. And it's an online collaboration platform where people can manage, share, analyze, visualize data across monitoring projects. And it's the first and only international bilingual portal of the Avian Knowledge Network. So you can get in there and see it in English or in Spanish. This is the geography that is covered. It's pretty big. You can see that it extends beyond the Sonoran Joint Venture. We included all of the Sonoran Joint Venture. We included Southern Nevada because that's, desert habitat. It technically should be part of the Sonoran Joint Venture, but Nevada wanted to all be in the same joint venture. So it's administratively Intermountain West. And then we included the Rio Grande Joint Venture, which is our sister JV to the east. And then the rest of Fish and Wildlife Service Southwest region, strategically thinking that maybe they would want to support this in the future. They have not yet, but I have hope. So you can go to BADSI, as we call it, the Borderlands Avian Data Center, and there is public-facing data that you don't need to have a username. You all can get in there right now, and any data that is publicly available, you can see. So I need to double check how frequently, like eBird data are in here. There's area survey data set. There's a at-sea data set, point counts, breeding bird surveys, data from banding at map stations. And so you can choose which data set you want to see. You can choose if you want to see a particular species, if you want to see a particular area. And then we have a series of overlays, and this is just showing some of them. So this overlay here is joint venture boundaries. So here I wanted to see point counts and area surveys within the Sonoran Joint Venture geography, and it shows it to me. And this is just a screenshot, so I can't actually demonstrate it to you, but if you clicked on one of these points in the real BADC website, a list will pop up over here on the side that shows you the birds that were seen at each one of those points. So there's a number of public-facing data sets. We have a tool called Pluma, which stands for Planning for Landscape Management and Adaptation. It's a tool that looks at the predicted impacts of climate change on bird distribution. And so again, this is not dynamic, but you can get in here, you can choose habitat, or you can just say all habitats. There are, I think, 67 species that we modeled. You can choose one of 5 different climate models and then play around with the period. And then it shows you what is the predicted habitat suitability for that species. So this is showing Lucy's warbler. This is its historic breeding range. This is looking at this model during April to June. Its historic breeding range is predicted to change significantly. So the darker blue colors are where it's most suitable. The lighter greens and the yellows are where it's least suitable. But it's just a tool that can help provide input on decisions, like where should we be investing? Should we be doing restoration work in this spot? Like particularly thinking about coastal areas. Should we do this major coastal restoration work for this spot that is predicted to be underwater 30 years from now? Or should we invest in places that we think we're going to need as an adaptation mechanism so that species can get from point A to point B? Or should we invest in this spot that we think is going to be important in the future, given the predicted changes to climate? So this is another example of a tool that we've developed for our partners. On the back end of BADC, where you have to have an account and log in, you can, as a biologist or a project leader or an analyst, use it to enter your data. You can analyze your data, you can visualize your data, you can just use it to support your data, and then you can download it and, if you want to analyze it in R or whatever platform you want, it's also available that way. But this is a tool, so you can imagine you're a project leader, you have 50 field techs out there doing surveys all across all the Channel Islands. They could enter their data in here and you have it all in the same spot. And then maybe a group in Mexico is doing work on the islands also, and they enter their data as well. And now all of a sudden you have one data set that has data across the same habitat, the same ecosystem, all accessible to the people that are doing that work. Just imagine how much that would improve your ability to make management decisions. And so groups are using BADC. It's bilingual. Some of my slides are in Spanish, some are in English. This is the Desert Thrasher Working Group. So you can go to BADC and look under the projects page and read about it. You can access all the resources. There's training materials on here. There's all of the data sheets that they use, various reports, and other documents. The Desert Thrasher Conservation Plan was just published within the last couple of months in English and in Spanish and is available here. It's just sort of a hub for those working as part of this. And they're doing surveys from New Mexico to California in the United States and in Baja and in Sonora in Mexico. And everybody is putting their data into the AKN so that they really are getting a good picture of what's going on with thrashers. And there are other groups. We have a Secretive Marshbird, a binational marshbird network that uses BADC. We have a binational brown pelican monitoring network. And this is something that actually got scuttled a little bit by January 2025, but we just had a meeting yesterday and are very excited about some creative mechanisms for reinvigorating this group and moving forward with some really good cross-border coordinated monitoring this year and next year. We have worked with partners to develop guides for landowners. This is a screenshot of two of them for folks that live in grasslands, people that live in riparian areas. I think we have an arid lands one also. And this is really designed for people who aren't biologists, people who aren't conservationists, but they want to do good things for wildlife on their land. And so there's sort of a field guide section that helps you identify what you're seeing. There are tools in there to sort of identify the current status of your habitat, and then suggestions for things that you can do to improve it for birds and other wildlife. And then for people that are biologists or are scientists, but maybe are not bird people, you know, like they're working with ranchers to develop grazing management plans, or they're fire ecologists, or they're foresters. We've developed this series of species and habitat accounts. They're designed for Arizona, but they have, other than the map, they do have applicability outside of the state. These are designed for people that are making management decisions that will affect birds and bird habitat, but that they don't necessarily have the detailed, in-depth bird knowledge. And so this is an example on the left. This is the LeConte's thrasher species account, and I apologize if this is too small to see, but there's sort of a conservation profile over on this side. Like, what are the things that are threatening it the most? What's its conservation status? Is it covered under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, etc.? What other birds, what other breeding birds are associated with it? There's a profile about the habitat that it uses for breeding, like the kinds of plants and the, you know, what its elevation is, its primary habitat, secondary habitat, territory size, and then natural history profile. When is it here breeding? When is it in migration? In winter, what's its nest type, nest substrate, nest height? What does it eat? Where does it forage? And going along with these species accounts are habitat accounts. So you're working in Sonoran Desert scrub. Like, what is that? Where do you find it? What is the vegetation structure? What kind of plants are there? What microhabitats are key there? This is in Arizona, what percentage of it, like the land ownership breakdown? Most Sonoran Desert scrub in Arizona is federally owned. There's a lot of BLM land. The threats in this habitat, vulnerability to climate change, and then bird relationships. So represented species that have accounts that you could go look at. So there's our LeConte's thrasher right there, other bird species. And then this is that category that I told you about, the stewardship responsibility. So things like cactus ferruginous pygmy owl, gilded flicker, five-striped sparrow, desert purple martin. These are things that only occur in Sonoran Desert scrub. So if we don't take care of them, they're kind of out there on their own. And this is just another example, yellow-billed cuckoo, the front page, and then it shows a map of the distribution of the species on the second page. The rest of the species accounts go into the threats, like what are the things affecting it, and then what conservation activities, management activities should people undertake. We do training and capacity building. We've taught workshops on monitoring, design, and implementation, bird banding techniques, MODIS tag, attachment. We've done a series of like a multi-year program on training people how to be bird guides. We're currently really invested in land steward workshops, so training that audience that I just talked about, like people that are managing the land, stewarding the land, but that are not necessarily bird people. So to help them understand what tools are available so that they can consider birds when making their decisions. This is a picture from a workshop that we did. It was a while ago, back in 2010, where we trained biologists from natural protected areas all across Mexico that worked for CONAMP, which is sort of the Mexican, sort of the equivalent of the Park Service, I guess, would be its closest corollary. It was a week-long workshop where we trained them how to design and implement a bird monitoring program for their protected area. And then, how am I doing on time? The last project I want to tell you about is sort of a fun one. It's called desert avocaching. And so this actually happened in southeastern California, where there's a lot of urban growth. There's a lot of energy development. If you've driven down, that I-10 corridor and seen all the solar panels and the wind turbines, it's really affecting the habitat, right? So habitat loss from alternative energy development leads to a decline of arid land birds. And birds in what we call the arid lands, including deserts, have declined about 46% since 1968. It's one of the most steeply declining bird groups out there. And we needed to understand what birds are using the region. So you hear about consultants being hired to do surveys around wind turbines or around solar panels, and like the birds that get hit by the wind turbine or crash into the solar panel, that's like horrifying. But all of the birds who are secondarily harmed just by habitat loss, by the creation of roads that get hit by cars, that the habitat that they need is no longer there, or the water that is used to clean the solar panels that is no longer in the ground or where that water needs to be. We just wanted to know what are the birds that are moving through and using the area. So if thousands of hectares of arid land is going to go away, and there's going to be mitigation money spent, what birds should be the focus of those efforts? So, Ben Dyer's thrasher there on the left, it's one of the fastest declining bird species in the region, one of the species that desert thrasher working group is looking at. On the right, this is a verdin. It's lost more than half of its breeding population over the last 40 years. And it's interesting to me in Tucson where I live, like you can't take a step outside without hearing 12 verdin calling. And it's amazing to me because it seems like such a common bird. And to know that there are 40%, there are more than half of them have disappeared over the last 40 years, and it's still, there must have been so many 40 years ago. It's remarkable. And the way we approach conservation, certainly in the United States, and I think, in lots of the world, is that we tend to wait until things get really, really bad before we do something about it. And wouldn't it be great if we could recognize the need to keep common birds common? Because it's a lot easier to conserve things if they're still common than to wait until they're very rare. And so this is part of the point of this effort too, was to not just look at the steeply declining tipping point species. Yes, they need our help, but how do we keep things from ever getting to that point in the first place? And so our question was, how are birds being impacted by solar energy development in Southern California? But, of course, there was a but. We had no money. We had zero funding to pay, to hire a field crew to send them out there to do monitoring. Oh no. What could we do? So we thought about it, and I had heard about this pilot project that the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and the eBird team had done up in Ithaca on a very, very small scale, called avocaching. And I reached out to them and learned more about it. And we decided to take this social psychology approach. We asked ourselves, what drives birders to bird? What makes them get out there and go different places? And if we understood that, could we use that knowledge to develop a game that would entice them to bird in the spots where we needed more information? We didn't know, but we thought we would try. And so we created this game that used eBird to entice birders to go to the spots where we needed them to go, and called it desert avocaching. And avocaching is geocaching plus eBird, but instead of, finding a little geocache box that has a toy in it, the birds are the treasures. And to prove that you were there, you submit an eBird checklist. And we set it up so that we had a top avocachers list real time, because a lot of eBirders like to see their names on lists. So we played into that. We tried to highlight kind of the adventure aspect and birding in places where you haven't birded before, gathering information about things that nobody has gathered information about before, at least on eBird. And of course, we wanted to have some glorious prizes. So we got some very generous donors to donate everything from optics and other birding equipment to apps to t-shirts and hats and memberships, so that for every checklist that you submitted from one of our avocaches from one of the designated spots, you would get a point. And the more points you got, that meant the more times your name was put in a raffle and you could win things. So we built a website. We worked through the Google interface to build this map, and we divided things up into different sections, I guess. And so from this map on your phone, we wanted to make it so that you could go from the Desert Avocaching website straight to eBird or straight to one of these points. So you clicked on one of these bubbles, and it opens up, and there's a link to the eBird hotspot. And then you can use your map, your navigation right in your phone to take you right there, where you can see the list of birds that have been seen there. And in many of these spots, when we started avocaching, it was empty. And the drive to be the first person to submit an eBird checklist for a new hotspot is pretty strong, it turns out. And so that was one of the carrots that we used to get people to go here. We developed a whole social media toolkit, a strategic communications plan. We thought about who are our key audiences and our key messages and how do we want to deliver the message. We gave presentations to Audubon groups and birding clubs to recruit birders. This is a picture from our social media toolkit. Oh, look, our old logo. We have a new logo now. We published an article on the eBird homepage on January 1st. It was like a New Year's Day thing. We had this tagline, bird off the beaten path. And this is another example of an image from our social media toolkit, a screenshot of our desert avocaching leaderboard. And you can see, it turned out we had a few people that submitted a whole lot of checklists, and the list kept track of the number of species you had seen collectively and the number of checklists. A lot of people just submitted 1 or 2 checklists, 3 or 4 checklists, but a small number of people really gave us a bunch of great information. And maybe you see some of your friends' names on here. What we got at the end of the game was the participation of 72 birders, over 400 checklists, over 140 species of birds that were observed. And we estimate that avocachers contributed more than 500 hours of their time and maybe $3,000 in mileage to travel to and from these desert avocaching locations. This is a map. It shows the number of presumed migrant individuals per minute of bird observation. And so, this is a spot where there's a lot of migratory birds moving through. So maybe it's a spot to reconsider placement of solar energy. So what did we learn? We learned that birders are suggestible. We already knew how important community science, citizen science, resources like eBird are to collecting data for bird conservation. But by using this social psychology lens, it helped us realize that with the right incentives, we really can influence birder behavior. We, of course, the key thing is that we learned migratory birds are potentially impacted by habitat loss and alteration caused by solar energy development. And we were able to share that information with the BLM that at the time that we ran this game, the BLM was really looking for input to influence their mitigation work. And then we also helped the Desert Thrasher Working Group test models that they were running to predict thrasher breeding habitat. And so our avocachers identified new sites for surveying that maybe weren't on the radar of the Desert Thrasher Working Group because they submitted checklists where there were thrashers. And then they identified other sites that could be removed from the list because they didn't see any thrashers. And so it was really a way that helped the group become more efficient, decrease costs, and just sort of benefits everybody. This is a picture of Kerry Ross. He was our winning avocacher, wearing his Sonoran Joint Venture t-shirt that he selected as his prize. And so I'm going to wrap it up there. If you are interested in learning more about the Sonoran Joint Venture, we have a management board. That is sort of invitation only, but if you are high up in a conservation NGO and think there's a role for your NGO on our board, I'm happy to talk. Our science working group is open to anybody with an interest in birds and bird conservation in the region. And the best way to learn about that is to sign up for our newsletter, our e-bulletin, and our listserv, which you can do on our website, sonoranjv.org. And with that, I will stop talking, and I'm happy to answer any questions if we have time.